The live stream of this meeting may be viewed on Comcast Xfinity channel. In accordance with this executive order, the public may only view the meeting on television and/or online and not in the council chambers. We are conducting this meeting in a virtual setting using Zoom. All planning commissioners and staff are participating from remote locations, and all voting will be conducted by roll call vote. Mr. Paulson, would you please call the roll?
Yes, thank you. Let the record show that all commissioners are present with the exception of Kendra Birch.
Okay, thank you very much. And then a note for the audience, while we normally say the Pledge of Allegiance at this point in the agenda, that practice has been temporarily suspended due to the Zoom format of our meetings. So as the Planning Commission conducts this meeting this evening on behalf of the Town Council and the residents of Los Gatos, we encourage active participation, which is essential for democracy and critical to the work of this Planning Commission. That participation can occur through: 1, prior to the meeting, written comments about agenda items submitted to staff are always welcome and helpful. Tonight, we have quite a number of written comments from members of the public on item 2 and an additional public comment on item 3, which is in addition to the many, many comments we received at our last meeting when item 2 was continued to today's meeting. And I thank you all residents for your comments. Also, during our meeting, there are 2 opportunities for members to the public to participate. First of all, during verbal communications, an individual can speak on any item that is not on the agenda. And during the hearing on a specific agenda item, any member of the public may speak about that item that is on the agenda. If you wish to address the commission tonight during verbal communications or during the consideration of an agenda item, you must join the Zoom webinar via the link and password provided in the staff report. When I announce the item for which you wish to speak, please click the raise hand feature in Zoom. And if you're participating by phone only, press *9 on your telephone keypad. When called to speak, please state your name and address for the record, although it is certainly optional for you to speak anonymously as well. So it's your choice. But in fairness, to all who want to speak at the meeting, it is requested that you limit your comments to 3 minutes. And regarding stating your name and address for the record, please note that the meetings are recorded. So if that affects your choice, you should be aware of that. So now we've come to the verbal communications portion of our meeting, where members of the public are invited to address the commission on any item not on today's agenda. So Mr. Paulson, do we have any attendees that wish to speak in verbal communications?
Let me check, Chair Hansen. So if anyone would like to speak on an item that is not on the agenda, please use the raise hand feature. Chair Hansen, I do not see anyone raising their hand.
Okay, so we will then move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the consent calendar. And we have 1 consent item to be acted upon with a single motion, and that is the approval of the minutes from our last meeting on August 26, 2020. Any member of the commission or the public may choose to pull an item from the consent calendar for additional discussion later in the meeting. Does any committee member or member of the public wish to pull the meeting minutes from the consent calendar?
And Chair Hansen, I'd like to note for the record that Commissioner Birch has arrived.
Welcome, Commissioner Birch. Thank you. I'll repeat the question. Does any member of the public or the commission wish to pull the meeting minutes for consideration as part of the agenda? I don't see any hands raised from commissioners, and it doesn't look like there's any in the attendees, so I will assume not. Are there any commissioners that want to make any recommended changes to the meeting minutes? I don't see anyone that wants to, so can I get a motion for approval of the minutes? It looks like Commissioner Hudis has his hand up.
I move to approve the consent calendar with the minutes.
And could I get a second, please? Commissioner Tivana.
I'll second that.
Thank you very much. Any comments or changes before I call the question? All right, seeing none, I will do a roll call vote. Commissioner Badami?
Yes.
Commissioner Birch?
Yes.
Commissioner Tivana?
Yes.
Commissioner Hudis,
Yes.
Commissioner Barnett,
Yes.
Vice Chair Janoff,
Yes.
and I vote yes as well, so it passes unanimously. So then we will move on to item 2 on the agenda, which is considering an approval of a request for modification to an existing architecture and site application S-13-90-090 to remove underground parking for construction of a commercial building, otherwise known as the Market Hall, in the North 40 specific plan area. This is APN 424-56-017. Architecture and site application is S-20-012. The property owner / applicant is Summerhill North 40 LLC. And for the members of the audience, this item was continued from the last meeting on August 26, 2020, to allow commissioners an opportunity for a site visit and to also allow more time for public comments. So may I have a show of hands up from commissioners that have been able to visit the site? Okay, and are there any disclosures? Commissioner Birch.
Due to the proximity of my home to the property, I do have to recuse myself for this item.
Okay, thank you for letting us know, Commissioner Birch. And then we will see you back for item 3. Okay, all right, great, thank you. And then there were no other disclosures by commissioners. Okay, so I'm understanding that Ms. Schupman will be giving the staff report for this item.
Good evening. On August 26th, the Planning Commission continued the proposal to modify the approved architecture and site application to remove a below grade level of the parking garage to its September 9th meeting. A desk item report has been provided to the Commission this evening, which contains additional public comments that were provided after the publication of the staff report. This concludes staff's presentation, but we are available to answer any questions.
Okay, so this would be a good time to ask questions because we did end up continuing the hearing from last time, and Commissioner Hudis has his hand up.
Yes, this is concerning guidance that we got from the town attorney within the last few hours. Is that guidance confidential, or is that information that the public can know about?
The public can certainly know about that, and I will try to articulate that to you and to the public. So as we all know, this project was part of litigation. The town council originally denied this project, and then litigation occurred, and the court made the town go back and rescind its denial and look at the project under what's known as the Housing Accountability Act. And what the court said, and it applies to this modification, it actually applies to any housing development or mixed-use project of more than one unit, is that you have to base your decision under that Housing Accountability Act, and you must base your decision on specific objective general plan, specific plan, or zoning code. You've got to find those objective standards. That's the only way you can deny a housing project under state law. There's been many subjective reasons in the correspondence that you've received, such as, the garage. If they don't have the garage, there'll be a parking problem. They'll be underparked, or it might be needed for future development, or the applicant promised it, therefore they should have to do it. All of those are subjective reasons why you would want to deny it. And we just don't have the discretion under state law anymore to deny a project based on discretion. The big issue is whether they meet our parking standards. There are some correspondence to talk about the math that they've used and whether they are have adequately describe the parking standards and whether they meet our parking standards. And if you determine that there is insufficient evidence to reach the conclusion that without the parking structure, the underground parking structures, they do not meet our parking standards, then that's something that you could deny this project on. But you can't deny it on the fact that because all of the other subjective reasons that I mentioned, and plus many others, that simply is not a reasonable basis to deny this project.
Commissioner Hedis. And then I also saw Commissioner Badami had her hand up as well.
So that's really helpful. We get into areas where it isn't always apparent to those of us who are not attorneys about whether we are looking at something that is a standard or an objective standard or a subjective standard. Is it okay with staff if we ask that question when we are deliberating, or if there's a follow-up question during testimony, to find out whether we are dealing with a objective standard or not?
Yes, if you can point to sections in, like I said, our zoning code and specific plan that are objective standards, and you don't believe they've met those objective standards with regards to underground parking, absolutely, you can ask staff that question, and that's what we're looking for, your guidance. We don't, although staff, analyzes the project, we don't have all the answers, and if you can come up with objective standards to either deny or approve this project, then certainly we're here to help you.
Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Badami.
I'm concerned that I literally got this information 10 minutes ago. Commissioner Barnett and I have been tied up in a conceptual development advisory committee hearing for almost a couple of hours. So just receiving this information, which I think is very important in making a decision, I need time to digest it and research it further. Is that possible where we could maybe continue this conversation or the hearing if other commissioners agree to it, or we just get a desk item and we just deal with it with the legal advice we get?
It's certainly an option to continue the, I'll look to staff for guidance on this, but we've already continued this item one time. So Director Paulson, do you have a comment on this?
Well, I think as you mentioned, that we've continued this already one time for some previous concerns raised by commissioners. I get a little bit worried that we are just delaying. There's also a possibility you can take a 15, 20-minute recess. I'm not sure how much research Commissioner Badami is interested in doing, but maybe she just hadn't had a chance to read through the email. So that's another option, that you could just take a short recess so that planning commissioners can look through that item. Maybe some other folks haven't had a chance to look at it either, and then reconvene the meeting. So unless the town attorney has other options, obviously, ultimately decisions are the planning commissions, but that's just my input on that. And if the town attorney has additional input.
Yeah, I apologize in giving it to planning commission at the late hour. I assume that the planning commissioners were aware of the Housing Accountability Act. Like I said, it doesn't apply to this project. It applies to all housing projects, that you must base your denial on objective standards, not subjective standards. That goes forward for any project. But certainly what I would suggest is, you open up the testimony, you hear all the testimony. If there is something that you need further clarification from staff because of the math, parking calculations, you're not satisfied with the determination that was made by the applicant or by staff, that certainly would be a reason to continue it. But that's really, it's a single issue in my mind, unless you can come up with other objective standards in our specific plan or parking regulations. It's really dealing with whether they meet our parking regulations without the underground parking structure.
Okay, thank you. I'll read through the email as we further our discussion.
And so Commissioner Badami and the rest of the commission, I think we should go ahead with the public portion of the hearing, hear from the applicant, and then if it turns out that any of you feel that you need more time to have all the facts, we can take a recess, or if absolutely necessary, we'll continue. And Commissioner Hedis has his hand up.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I do have some questions of staff that would be helpful to know before hearing from the applicant, because it's difficult to be able to ask intelligent follow-up questions if if I'm not sure about how we're evaluating this and actually why we're evaluating this as well. So I did have sort of a few contextual questions for staff, not about the specifics of the proposal, but the purview of the commission and how we are to evaluate this.
Okay, I think that's perfectly appropriate at this time, and you know, this is the best time to do that before we proceed into to the applicant testimony. That way, we can avoid duplicate questioning and so on and so forth. So go ahead, and I have some questions as well. So go ahead.
Great. I'm just trying to understand when I'm relating this back to the specific plan, and there's some things that are not clear about what type of project this is. So there is in the specific plan, there's a discussion about mixed use projects 2.5.10, but there's also a reference to residential use for affordable housing that has a different entry in one of the tables for the parking requirements. So are we to evaluate this as a mixed use?
So Commissioner Gatos, you said 2.5.1?
0.10?
Right, so that's maximum development capacity.
No, I'm sorry. This is in the land use and development standards, page 2-22.
So 2.5.10.
Yes.
And where do you see parking requirements in there?
Under the last paragraph on the left-hand column, D, says dedicated parking spaces shall be provided for residents and shall be clearly distinguished from spaces provided for commercial and/or office use. So that falls under 2.5.10. Is this considered a mixed-use project?
Yes, this is a mixed-use project, and the parking for the senior affordable housing will be demarcated, and the applicant can probably provide additional information on that.
Okay. The other question I have is on page 3-21 of the design guidelines. There's an item M. Does that not apply because that's a different type of housing, or does that apply?
Sorry, what page was that on?
3-21.
Oh, okay, 21. Thank you. Wait a second. And so you're looking at 3.3.1, site planning and design. You said letter D?
No, I'm on letter M, 3-21
Okay.
of the residential design guidelines. Does that not apply to this project?
So that is more strictly for the residential specific projects. So that would be most of the rest of the phase 1 project.
Okay. Let's see. That one. And in page 3-22, 3.3.2D, it says below grade parking is encouraged with entries placed at the rear or sides of the structure whenever possible. Does that not apply because of the word encouraged?
That is not an objective standard because it says encouraged.
Okay. Those are all the questions I have now. I have quite a few relating to the math, but I'll hold that until we hear.
Okay. I do have a question for staff, and then if any other commissioners do as well, I'm happy to have you raise your hand. So Director Paulson, I just wanted to, for the benefit of the commission as well as as the audience, we have there was tables in the staff report that talked about the parking requirements. So it basically says that even with removing the underground parking, that based on the information in the specific plan, they will be above the parking that's required that was agreed to in the specific plan. So specifically, I wanted to ask about the two different parts of it. So the origin of the decision that got into the specific plan where the senior housing needs basically one parking space per resident, a half for the resident and a half for a guest. The origin of that was it's spelled out in the specific plan or some other document.
Yes, that is in table 2-4 on page 2-15 of the specific plan.
Okay, so according to the plan that was approved and that they're building to, that decision was already made that decision has already been made that that's the amount of parking that was needed. And it I guess when the applicant speaks to, we could find out, but Eden Housing is managing the project, and I don't know if they're going to be available tonight or not, but they contributed to this thing to determine what the amount of parking was that was needed.
As I recall, yes, they thought that this would be adequate parking for this type of use.
Okay. And then as far as the spaces for the commercial application, could you just explain how that's calculated and how it got into the plan?
Sure. So on, again, page 2-15, 2.5.8 spells out the parking requirements. And it, in summary, says that the non-residential uses in the specific plan area shall utilize the downtown requirements for those non-residential uses. And so generally, restaurant, commercial, retail, personal service, those are one parking space for every 300 square feet.
Okay, and so that's what came into the staff report was those numbers that were agreed to in the specific plan that are, and in the case of the commercial, it's similar, but maybe not exactly the same. The methodology for calculating the amount of parking is similar to what we use elsewhere in town.
What we use in the downtown specifically, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Commissioner Hudis, you had your hand up.
Yeah, coming back to that, that's in the same section as the mixed use parking requirement. And so when we're looking at the number of off-street spaces required for a mixed use, there's non-residential and residential. How does that relate to mixed use?
Well, if you look at table 2-4.
Yes, I'm looking at it.
Yep. So A is the non-residential use in a mixed use building, which we have here, which is the downtown parking requirements. And then B is residential uses, and the parking requirements are split up between senior, affordable housing units, those have the same parking requirements, 1-bedroom units, and units that have 2 bedrooms or more. Those are the parking requirements for a mixed use building.
Okay. I did have one more question about whether this is the purview of the Planning Commission.
Go ahead.
So there's a table, so I can find it. It basically defines who makes decisions. It's part of the implementation plan. And so my question is, why is this before the Planning Commission?
So I think you might be
discretionary review, discretionary approval summary table on E-3.
right. So that's what lays out the requirements. Because the modification is a modification to the architecture and site, Planning Commission is the deciding body on that.
But reduced parking requirement for senior/affordable housing, that says that's approved by the Director of Community Development if findings can be made, or I guess the DRC.
So they're not asking for a reduction in senior parking.
Okay. Okay, so this is why it's under the purview of the Planning Commission, because it's a mixed use parking reduction.
They're changing an aspect, removing the one level of underground parking, I felt that type of modification needed to go through the architecture and site process, and the Planning Commission is the deciding body for all architecture and site processes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and I just had two more quick questions, and then we'll hear from the applicant. So a number of the public comments came in and talked holistically about parking for the entire North 40 complex. So what I wanted to ask staff was, supposing that the plan numbers were wrong in the specific plan, and it turns out we really don't have enough parking, which many people are convinced of that. Are we able to use the holistic parking requirements of the North 40 Phase 1 project relative to making this decision on this particular building?
I think I follow what you're saying, but ultimately, every project has to provide the required parking at a minimum level as required by the specific plan. The Phase 1 project exceeded that number. Any future project that comes in and goes before the Planning Commission will have to show that they are providing adequate parking pursuant to the specific plan for their specific project.
So you're saying, as proposed, all of the rest of the Phase 1 plan is meeting the parking requirements that are set on the specific plan as well?
That's correct.
Okay, so that's one thing, and then so the final question I had was, supposing that it is the will of the town and the commission, and going forward basis, to revisit the parking standards that are in the Phase 1, the current North 40 specific plan approved, before we get a Phase 2, is that possible?
That is possible. It would require a specific plan modification, but it would not be applicable retroactive to the Phase 1 project. Okay,
all right. That answers my question. Do any other commissioners have questions for staff before we go to hear from the applicant? Okay, seeing none, we will now open the public hearing and first give the applicant an opportunity to address the commission for up to 5 minutes. And I thought I saw in the attendees list, we do have someone from Summerhill Homes that will be speaking.
I would ask that whoever is going to represent Summerhill Homes, please raise your hand. And it looks like Mr. Keeney, so I will allow him to talk.
Okay, Mr. Keeney.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Good evening, Commissioner Hanson, members of the Planning Commission and staff. My name is Michael Keeney, and I'm the Development Manager for Summerhill Homes on the North 40 project. As you probably observed, we are well underway with the construction of the project. We've started home construction, and we are progressing on off-site transportation improvements of well over $10 million to support the project and expand traffic capacity in the area for the benefit of the town and future residents. As currently designed, the Market Hall garage has an excess of 179 parking spaces as determined by the town's parking regulations. The excess parking spaces were included in the original design based upon the previous developer strategies related to the potential development of Phase 2. That developer is no longer involved in the Market Hall development, and Summerhill Homes has no involvement in the potential development of Phase 2. There's no obligation in the conditions or specific plan to Market Hall to provide parking for future phases. Accordingly, we are requesting the elimination of the basement portion of the garage structure, reducing the parking spaces in the garage by 127. This would leave a total of 176, which is 52 in excess of what's required by the town parking regulations. With this modification, there will be significantly more parking than is required, and the proposed modification has several benefits to the project in the town of Los Gatos. The elimination of the basement will result in reduced construction activity, noise, and dust from a shorter construction duration. It will result in the reduction of approximately 1,700 truck trips that would be required to off-haul the soil for the basement excavation, and approximately 400 concrete trips to build the basement. The elimination of the basement removes a potential public safety problem, particularly if it is rarely used, and the modification is supported by the Silicon Valley Bicycle Coalition and our affordable housing partner, Eden Housing, who will own and manage the senior affordable housing units that will be a part of the building. It will also result in reduced operating expenses for the affordable housing and the commercial uses, in addition to reduced construction costs. You have received several comments regarding how the parking was calculated and what the correct calculations should be. And I can understand that they're a little tricky, but we have based our calculations on what the town's requiring based on the current code. The parking tables that are included in the ANS application are based on what was included in the code at the time and based on assumptions about the land use. To date, the only building that has submitted for a building permit is the Market Hall. And we've refined the design and worked with staff to determine what the parking requirement is, and based on the current zoning code. These numbers are reflected in the Market Hall parking requirements table that we included in our letter of justification and are consistent with what's before you in this proposal. And Jennifer, do you have that exhibit 2 that I was going to use later? It might be good to use it now. So we in response to the comments about the parking tables, we did put together a table that's based on the Market Hall building permit as proposed, and the assumptions on what the commercial district would have remaining. So this table reflects what's in the square footage assumptions of the ANS for the remaining commercial pads at the current code requirements. And as you can see, there is a surplus of parking. The surplus of parking in aggregate is 45 spaces, because the Market Hall has a surplus of 52, but the commercial pads are a little short. So in total, that's noted in the footnote. In total, you have a surplus of parking district-wide of 22%, with Market Hall having a surplus of 61%. We would like to thank staff for moving this application forward in a timely manner and for their accurate summary of the project's compliance and exceedance of the parking required for the building, and we're available to answer any questions you may have. I should also add, we do have Eden Housing is available and some of our other consultants as well, if something comes up that's more appropriate for them. Okay, good. If commissioners have questions for Eden Housing, they're available as well tonight. Okay. At this point, okay. At this point, do any commissioners have questions for the applicant? I see Commissioner Gatos has his hand up.
Thank you. I have many questions, but I'm going to wait until after public testimony because almost all of them were raised by the public. I had one question before then, though, and that is regarding the progress of the project. Has the project proceeded with the assumption that the underground parking will be eliminated? No, there's nothing that we've done with construction to date that would be changed by the decision of the Planning Commission. All of the infrastructure to serve the building has been under construction to the extent that it can be, and nothing has been installed that would prevent the structure from being built in either design. Thank you.
Okay, do other commissioners have questions? Vice Chair Janoff.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Keeney, could you please, to the best of your knowledge, summarize the commercial or residential non-designated parking that is outside of the Market Hall or the commercial parking requirements within those vicinities? There's a number of spaces beyond the market hall or the commercial buildings, do you have any idea what those would be? Just so that we have general understanding of what parking there might be in excess of what is being discussed tonight.
So the surface parking on sort of in the transition district is approximately 130 stalls. The individual commercial pads haven't been fully designed, and we're not the applicant for those. But the preliminary estimates are for 130 stalls, both on the private streets throughout the commercial district and on surface parking lots on the commercial pad.
So those include the commercial parking pads that are not associated with the market hall?
Correct.
Okay.
And that's shown on the table that was up earlier.
Thank you.
Okay, before we go to public comments, I did have a question, and it's about the senior housing parking. So obviously the standard is defined in the North 40 specific plan, but we did get many questions from the public about how could it be possible that that only 1/2 space for each resident and then 1/2 space for their guests would be needed, and then and in addition how it would be policed. So I was hoping that either Summerhill Homes or if Eden Housing is available could answer that question, because the public can make their comments, but we can't respond to them during the meeting. So I was hoping we could hear from Eden Housing about why they're comfortable with that number, because people are thinking they might have teenage kids, they might have multiple cars, they might have caregivers. Like how would they end up not using the other parking, or how did that work? So is there somebody that could speak to that? Well,
Maybe let me give you just a couple answers and then I'll pass it off. And if there's a need for follow-up, Eden's available. So there are a total of 50 spaces allocated for the affordable housing. They're on the 3rd floor of the parking structure. So 47 of the 50 spaces are on the 3rd floor of the parking structure, and there is a security gate between the 2nd and 3rd floor. So effectively, the senior affordable project has its own floor of parking that's in a secure environment, and Eden would have an on-site apartment manager and on-site coordination with their tenants to help manage the parking along with everything else and make sure that there weren't problems with that. That's sort of the simple big picture explanation. If you would like more information and details, Dixie from Eden Housing can probably raise her hand, and Joel can allow her to respond as well.
If that's possible, it would be great if we could hear from Dixie.
Hi, good evening, commissioners. Can you hear me all very well?
Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you for allowing the opportunity to just provide comment on this. Eden Housing is proud to be a partner with Summerhill on this project. We own and operate 36 senior properties amongst our entire portfolio, totaling about 2,700 units. Of that, 4 of those properties are located in Santa Clara County with over 300 units of senior housing. Throughout the entire history, we've parked each of our senior buildings at a 0.5 ratio in suburban locations. And in urban locations, we sometimes park those to a lesser degree, especially if they're adjacent to a transit-oriented stop. So we find that in looking at this development and looking at the needs across our portfolio, that parking at a 0.5 ratio for the unit themselves are adequate, more than adequate, and having visitor parking at a 0.5 is also adequate. What we tend to do when we are looking at all of our developments is in managing spots. When residents come into the development, if they do not have a vehicle, they aren't issued a parking pass to park in there. And that has been able to help us manage parking demands in terms of our senior facilities. In our history, that's just how we've operated our developments. I'm available to answer any additional questions you may have.
Commissioner Hudas has a question for you.
So thank you. It's a little difficult to understand, but I want to just sort of ask simply, one of our residents, Dr. Dreher, raised the question, what is the assumption of the transportation needs of the 50% of seniors who will have no place to park? In the assumption that some of the households have more than one vehicle, and will they be taking public transit? Will they be riding a bicycle? How will they get to healthcare? What's the assumption for that group that has no place to park?
Well, thank you, Commissioner. Actually, we don't make those assumptions. We just look across our portfolio needs and the historical needs within our facilities, and find that, you know, that's just, it's been an adequate level of parking for our senior developments. Of course, additional public transportation mitigates that. And yes, some families will indeed have more than one vehicle. Some will not have any vehicles. We found that to be quite common, especially when our seniors are aging in place, meaning they tend to stay there for very long periods of time. Yes, sir. Did you have a follow-up?
Yes, I appreciate the averages, but we're dealing with a specific here. Is there specific public transit that you're relying on for this development to satisfy that requirement?
Dixie, maybe I can help a little bit with this one. This is Mike.
Thank you, Mike.
The project has a traffic demand management plan, which has now been approved, which includes funding for a town-wide shuttle bus program or other transportation measures as the town deems appropriate to help reduce traffic. And the TDM plan has a obligation to provide a transportation coordinator. So in addition to this, to the administrative support that Eden's team provides to their residents, the Market Hall structure as a condominium entity in coordination with the for sale residential side of the project will have a transportation coordinator who is responsible for providing outreach to all of the residents in the community to help assist them with things like carpool coordination, different kinds of transportation benefits, bicycle, different ways to reduce traffic trips and provide assistance to everyone. And the obligation is to achieve a 15% reduction in trips from the project site. And it's completed with annual reporting to the town. And if the compliance isn't achieved, then it's the obligation of the associations and the transportation coordinator to identify alternate solutions to achieve that objective.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Hudas, you have a follow-up question?
Yeah, I'm not sure that answered my question. I was really asking about what specific public transit is being relied on for this project.
The public transit in the area is a VTA bus line on Los Gatos Boulevard. It runs from basically loops off up Los Gatos Boulevard, and I believe it comes down Santa Cruz to the VTA station in Campbell.
Okay, I'm well aware of what that is. It's extremely limited, but thank you.
Okay, so thank you for your comments, and there will be an opportunity for commissioners to ask additional questions after we take public testimony. So if there are no more questions from commissioners, we will go ahead and move on to public testimony. And so Mr. Paulson, do we have, it looks like we have some hands up I can see in the attendees list. So
We do. Again, for those in the audience who wish to speak on this item, please use the raise hand feature. The person at the top of the list currently is Maria Risto.
Okay, and so before I hand over the floor to Ms. Risto, I do want to remind anyone that's speaking during the public portion of the meeting that you may choose to state your name and address for the record, or you may choose to speak anonymously. It's your choice. But we do ask that you limit your comments to 3 minutes. So thank you, and go ahead, Mr. Risto.
Okay, thank you. Maria Risto, and I'm actually scrambling to try and catch up with this because I had submitted a letter actually stating that we should retain the underground parking with the concern that the entire North 40, regardless of how it's developed, has been envisioned as one project under the specific plan. And there's no way we're going to go back and dig out under a parking structure if we don't put the underground parking in right now. What's thrown me for a loop is this discussion of the Housing Accountability Act. And I was trying to rush through the data from the previous meeting. And I really think there needs to be another look taken at this, because we've been through this with the North 40 before, and the Housing Accountability Act requires that the residential be 2/3 to qualify, I believe, which is like 67% or more than 66%. And if I go back quickly to Exhibit 6 from the prior meeting, the total gross residential is listed at 47,811 square feet. The total gross commercial is 28,966. And so if you do the math, if this parcel by itself is being looked at, that comes out to 62.27% residential. So I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this is the whole thing taken, but if we're talking about just this parcel, I don't see how the Housing Accountability Act applies here. So I'm thinking that there are grounds to take another look at this or take more time looking at it. But I apologize. I'm like rapidly trying to go back and forth through documents while I'm trying to listen to this Zoom meeting. But anyway, I don't know if that's helpful. I know you can't answer my questions, but I want to throw those numbers out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Risto. And we do have the opportunity for any commissioners to ask questions of anyone that speaks from the public. Do any commissioners wish to ask questions? Vice Chair Janoff.
Yes, this is a question for the town attorney. You mentioned in your notes to us that the Housing Accountability Act does apply, and it sounded like what you were saying is that it applied as a result of the court order, and that's how I read your guidance. Could you please comment whether the Housing Affordability Act actually does or does not apply to this question that we have before us tonight?
So the 66% requirement actually came in after the project was approved. So there could very well be an issue raised by Maria, whether this actual project that's in front of you, if you'll give me a few minutes, I can look at those changes that were made. So there were a couple changes that were made after our project at court, one being that attorney's fees are now mandatory because the developer in this case didn't get attorney's fees. So they went to Sacramento and got that changed. And there were some changes regards to the percentage. So I can look at those and right as you continue on with public comment and come back to me.
And through the chair, I would just offer that this is one component of the entire phase one, but they have vested the other portions, which it's still part of the entire phase one that was originally approved. So as the town attorney is looking through that information, the parking is specific to this portion because this portion hasn't been vested yet from that perspective, but I just offer those comments as well.
Okay, thank you very much on that. All right, so who's up next? Mr. Director Paulson.
1 second. Liana, it will be up next, and so I will allow her to talk.
Okay.
So Liana or Leanna, if you unmute yourself, you'll be able to speak.
Hello, my name's Liana Palmer, and do you need my address?
Only if you choose to submit it.
Oh, okay. Well, in Los Gatos. And I am calling to just kind of speak informally, briefly, that I'm opposed to eliminating the underground parking because maybe for the reasons that the town attorney says are not good reasons, but Grosvenor spent a lot of time planning the entire 40 acres, and some of those meetings I attended, and the underground parking was to accommodate some of the parking that would be required on the other phase 2 portion. And by taking over this from, Summerhill taking this over from Grosvenor, I think that they need to follow through with the plan they took over. I don't have the numbers to say it's not going to be enough parking if they eliminate the underground, but I'm just saying I think it's really needed so that parking doesn't overflow into the residential neighborhood around it, or out on the street, and then the town would have to change the street construction town. Anyway, I just, and the other thing is, would Summerhill need to pay Grosvenor more money or whatever for what they've done, since they're eliminating a whole expensive part of what they bought into, and now they will, I don't know, presumably have a greater profit by just ticking off this thing they don't need to build. Okay, so that's my not very coherent comment, but I'm just very opposed to letting them off the hook on this bait and switch operation. So thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you so much for your comments. It's very much appreciated by everyone in the commission. And do any commissioners have any questions for the speaker? Commissioner Gatos.
Actually, this is a question for chair or town attorney. This is a virtual public meeting. In a normal public meeting, you'd know who's there, how many people are there. Of course, we don't know how many will speak, but can we get some sense about how many participants there are or observers there are tonight?
There's 26 attendees in the list. I don't know if you can click on participants at the bottom, you can see there's panelists and then there's attendees, but there's 26. But what we don't know is we don't always know who's here to speak about which item. We also have 2 other items after this. I presume that most people are here to speak about the item 2, but.
Okay, thank you. And I am able to see it, but I want to make sure the public has the experience of a public hearing.
Okay, yes. And I will also note, I didn't completely count it up, but I believe we got approximately 50 letters from members of the public, then written comments. So. All right, so who would be next? Director Paulson.
Next will be Kendra Birch.
Okay, Ms. Birch.
Hello. I want to thank everybody for taking the time tonight to look again at this item and to allow us to speak. I had a prepared statement to make concerning our neighborhood, our proximity to the property, been presented to us as more of an overall project. However, in light of some of the changes, I thought I'm going to try off the cuff to make a few comments. Unfortunately, knowing that we need to look at this in a little bit of a different way, not so much as maintaining the existing approved application. Instead, we're taking a look at this through the lens of compliance with HAA and with court orders. I think that's left a number of us kind of in the lurch and being able to create comments. I was at my kids' open house or, Zoom open house for school. Unfortunately, I didn't have an opportunity to take a look at those items to create some probably better statements to make around that. And because of that, I would ask that the Planning Commission considers continuing this, not only to allow all of you time to take a look at those documents, but to allow residents to spend some time looking at them too and educating ourselves around what that means. I think that it would be very valuable in allowing us to do that, just simply because I think you're going to hear a lot of us that originally had the same thing to say over and over again, which was, please maintain the existing application. I think if we had time to review those, we could probably have a more substantial conversation with you. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments. Do any commissioners have any questions for, I guess it's Ms. Birch in this context. All right. Okay. Who's next?
Thank you, Chair. Next will be Ms. Dodson.
Hello. Hello. Hi, this is Barbara Dotson. Let's see. I do oppose eliminating the underground garage. I believe Summerhill's proposal focused on parking just for the market hall. However, the market hall parking is just one element of the parking for the entire transition district A, B, and C. According to sheet A.11 in Summerhill's proposal, the town's requirement for parking stalls in this area in district A, B, and C is 354 stalls. Without the underground garage, Summerhill will provide only 330 parking spots for district A, B, and C. This becomes clear just by looking at sheet A.11. Under required commercial stalls for the area, we see 285. Under provided commercial stalls for the area, we see 261. The bottom line for me is that we can't approve the Summerhill proposal because it provides 24 fewer parking spaces than required by the town. So I guess I need everyone to look carefully at sheet A11 because it shows that they're not providing the number of spots that are required by the town. And I would like to get some explanation for why they think they are. I want to also point out that one of the senior units has 2 bedrooms. So why are there not 2 parking spots provided for a 2-bedroom unit? Finally, I do think developers should stick to their commitments. The original developer committed to building the underground garage. There was a lot of discussion about this during the original hearings. The original developer didn't want to build the garage. The new developer doesn't want to do it now, but the garage was a condition of the approval of the project. I don't see why it is legal for someone to buy out a project and then say, well, there are certain parts that I just don't feel like doing. And I would really like to hear the legal argument for how that can happen. I also think it's really ridiculous that Mr. Schultz did not make this information available to the public. I would have, certainly changed my remarks if I had known that this was information that was necessary. So I would like him to provide this information in a public-friendly forum so that we can all take a look at it and proceed from there. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments, Ms. Dodson. And Commissioner Hudis has a question for you.
Thank you, and thank you for doing all of the work on the important calculations and requirements. You pointed out in your letter that there was a discrepancy between 330 and 331 parking places. Has that discrepancy been resolved?
No, I mean, that's a discrepancy in the proposal that Summerhill has given. I mean, it's in the material that we're all reading. Sometimes it says 330, sometimes it says 331. I think the math, the original number of parking spaces for ABC was 485. So then when they deducted 176 in one of their one of their tabulations, that's where they came up with 331, I think, is what happened. So, just in different places, they did different math.
Okay, thank you. And we don't have the opportunity really to interact with staff at this point, but I have your notes. Thank you.
Do any other commissioners have questions for the speaker? Again, thank you very much for your comments and for all your research and for providing them in writing as well. Are there other attendees that wish to speak on this item?
So I see one hand raised, but it's Liana who has already spoke and is not able to speak again. I will open it up in case there is a second person using that computer, but if it's Liana, she will not be able to speak again. So I will open it up just for that. Liana, is there another member of your household that wishes to speak?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so
and with that, I would just again note anyone who wishes to speak on this item, please use the raise hand feature. And I am not seeing anyone using the raise hand feature,
okay.
Chair.
Okay. All right, so then if there are no other speakers at this point for this item, we will now close the public portion of the public hearing and ask if any commissioners have questions of staff. I apologize. This is the time when we would ask the applicant to come back and respond for up to 3 minutes. I apologize. So Summerhill, if you would like to speak for an additional opportunity to respond to things that were raised during public comments, this would be the time to do so.
Thank you, Chair. I've allowed Mr. Keeney to speak.
Thank you, Commissioners. Once again, this is Mike Keeney with Summerhill Homes. We appreciate the comments and participation of the public in this hearing. We are pleased to be developing this project in the town of Los Gatos and believe it will be an asset to the community for many years to come. The application is an amendment to an approved project that we have a building permit for the Market Hall structure, and we would like to start construction as soon as possible. We believe strongly that this modification will result in a more pedestrian and bike-friendly development that is consistent with the goals and spirit of the specific plan. As discussed, this parking was originally intended to serve phase 2 of the North 40. Its inclusion in the project is unnecessary and counterproductive. Construction of the basement would be a waste of financial resources and would materially increase the operating costs of Market Hall, thus further jeopardizing the success of this retail project, and the operating costs of the additional parking spaces will also have a negative financial impact on the affordable senior housing project. You've heard from the community that if the basement is eliminated, it will result in parking overflowing into the existing neighborhood. Jennifer, do you have the walking exhibit we set up that you could put up? We put together an exhibit to kind of look at some of the surrounding neighborhoods and the walking distances that someone would have to travel if they parked there to get to Market Hall, which will probably pop up on the screen here in a second. As you can see, it's a 9 to 15 minute walk from these neighborhoods to the Market Hall building. And as we've discussed, the Market Hall will have 45 more parking spaces than it is required to have. So the idea that it's just unrealistic to conclude that customers of Market Hall will be parking 10 minutes away when the parking structure has a surplus of parking as is. Good planning, fairness, and common sense support this request before you. If there was fact-based evidence that the elimination of the parking would negatively impact the surrounding neighborhoods, we would not be pursuing this design amendment. Summerhill has built multiple projects in the town of Los Gatos over the last 20 years, most recently the Sorellas project on Prospect Avenue. We are proud of these projects and our partnership with the town and community that has developed with the past project and the North 40. Our focus has been to create communities that are well thought out and become positive experiences for the town and our future homeowners. This design revision is consistent with that philosophy, and we ask for your approval to this modification. We are available to answer any questions you may have, and in particular, I know there's some questions about the parking calculations in the ANS approval versus the new code requirements that we've shown. So we're happy to talk more about that and answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
And this would be a great time for any commissioners to ask Mr. Keeney any additional questions, including anything that came up during the public comments. Commissioner Gatos.
Thank you. I have a number of questions about the math and the requirements for parking. I also have questions about the agreement, the phase 1, phase 2, the bike aspects of it, the safety aspects of neighborhood and community benefit. But I don't want to totally monopolize this. So I'd maybe like to start with an explanation about the comments and a reaction to the comments that we got from Ms. Dodson on sheet A11. And could you maybe just simply tell me why there is not a deficit of 24 spaces?
So the parking table in A11 is a duplication of the architectural and site approval parking table. And staff could probably help characterize how that was prepared, but it was prepared at the time of the ANS approval with assumptions about the land uses that would likely be there. And it was based on the parking requirement in the code at the time, which was more specific to specific land uses. So the application that we've submitted is exclusive to the Market Hall parcel. It's parcel 27 of the final map. And parcel 27 of the final map, the Market Hall, is obligated to meet its parking ratio per the specific plan of 1/300. And that's the number that's in your letter of justification, which is the square footage that we estimate if the garage was eliminated. The commercial space within the garage doesn't really change with the elimination of the basement. There's some tweaks to the mechanical rooms and stuff, but it doesn't really affect the leasable square footage, which is what the parking calculations are based on. So it's a pretty accurate number for what the building would be if we completed the redesign to eliminate the basement. The estimates that I provided in the table that I put up during my presentation are based on the gross square footages in the remaining commercial parcels from the specific plan. So that's at 1/300 based on the table on A11. I'm sorry, A1, is it A11? And those numbers will change when an applicant comes forward on each of those buildings. They'll submit a building permit, and they'll have square footage calculations that will have to meet the 1/300 requirement of the specific plan. So it could change a little bit, but if anything, it would likely go down, and it would be their obligation to comply with the obligation to provide their parking.
So if I could go back maybe to the beginning of your answer, the requirements, are you saying that they are based on current code requirements, not the requirements that were done in the original application?
That's correct. We're complying with the zoning requirement for the parking for the use we've proposed at 1/300 square feet. The previous calculation was more complicated.
And why does the previous calculation not apply now?
That might be a better question for staff, but I believe the specific plan references the downtown parking guidelines, and therefore we're following the downtown parking guidelines.
But it's your justification letter. It doesn't rely on staff.
Well, it relies on the code.
Yes, and it's your obligation to make the argument about why that code doesn't apply and why a different code applies.
Well, it's the code that the building's being permitted under. It's the zoning code for the specific plan as it stands when the permit is being issued.
Okay, I had another question on the math. There's reference to 330 or 331 parking places. What's the correct number?
So the correct number that I would suggest you concentrate on is the numbers for Market Hall in the parking requirements in the letter of justification. The parking estimates for the remainder of the commercial district are estimates based on the architectural and site approval. And I don't know exactly why there's one spot off. It could be, Ms. Dodson also pointed out that the community room in Market Hall has a slightly different parking requirement, and that's because the square footages are slightly different. So that parking requirement actually increased by one space because the community room increased by one space, or by a couple hundred square feet from the architectural and site approval table.
Again, are you able to clarify that at this time, or do you need to do some research before clarifying that?
Jocelyn, are you raising your hand, or the table that we prepared and submitted, which was up earlier, has our estimate of the commercial square footage based on the 1/300, and the square footage estimates for parcels A1, well, building A1, A2, B2, and C. But what those buildings ultimately are permitted at and what their parking requirement is to be determined when they submit a permit. They would comply with the 1 per 300 requirement. So the table that is being referenced is a combination of the revision to Market Hall, the previous parking requirements based on the land uses intended at the time the specific plan was approved. So there's quite a few variables that have changed during that time.
I know, but I'm
answer for why it's 1 parking space off. No.
Okay. I had some other questions, but I don't want to dominate this. So other folks would like, I'll just hold mine for a few minutes.
Would other commissioners like to ask any questions of the applicant at this point? Commissioner Barnett.
Yes, is it Summerhill's position that the only reason for the underground parking was to accommodate parking in phase 2? And if so, what evidence is there of that?
Well, I think in addition to us saying it, it's been said by members of the public during this hearing. I think we've heard that from staff. I think that was a known, publicly discussed component. I think at the time there was also a consideration that there might be more commercial at the site, and as the project evolved, that was reduced. But I apologize, I wasn't the project manager at that time, so I don't have all of the history from the actual approval.
So is it fair to say that you may or may not know whether Summerhill's position is that there isn't excess parking in the underground garage because it's, let me start over. Is it Summerhill's position then that the underground parking is not necessary to accommodate the retail and senior housing and the community room?
Yeah, our position is that the Market Hall building is already overparked with this revision by approximately 60%, and that's more than adequate for the uses that are proposed, and that it provides a surplus for the adjacent commercial uses as they develop. And that when and if phase 2 develops, they would obviously have to meet all the specific plan requirements to move forward with their project and provide the parking that's required per the specific plan, just like we do.
Does that answer your question, Commissioner Barnett?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Before I go back to Commissioner Gatos, I wanted to follow up on where the conversation was going with Commissioner Barnett. If I heard you correctly, the way this process works is when you submit the architecture and site application, or when you did submit the original architecture and site for the entire phase 1 project, you had an estimate on how much commercial space there would be. And you said that has evolved over time. And then you said it went down. So how much less commercial space than was proposed with the ANS are we going to have now than we thought we were having?
So for the Market Hall?
For the entire phase 1, because we were talking about the difference of what Ms. Dodson was presenting, which was all the commercial parking requirements for the phase 1 application versus and this hearing is only about the Market Hall, but you talked about the process overall when you submit an architecture and site, that it's based on estimated. And I thought you said when you were talking to Commissioner Barnett that there actually is less commercial space overall than was originally intended, and that we won't really know the answer for sure about how much parking is needed until those commercial developers come in and build out those pads and so on and so forth. So did I get that right? Or
yeah, no, I didn't mean to say that the total square footage of the commercial would be reduced. What I wanted to represent was that the table that I put up during my presentation that had the parking estimate that we put together for the entire commercial district, which is Exhibit 2, if Jennifer wants to put it up. And that square footage number, which is shown in the table, is approximately the gross square footage number from the architecture and site approval. So the distinction is that when the commercial sites are actually worked out for building permits, that square footage, some of it gets netted out for corridors and, back of house space that isn't leasable square footage. So what I was trying to say was that the commercial estimate that I'm including here is a conservative estimate, and that likely the square footage would be slightly lower, not the leasable square footage, but the square footage the parking calculation is based on.
Because of stuff that's not needed for the actual commercial use.
Correct.
It's sort of support stuff. Okay.
Exactly. And that's actually shown in the ANS table. It's just that it's a really complicated table, and I didn't think we'd want to go through that level of detail.
But to close this out, just so I think I understand. That I didn't hear you correctly that there's actually less space. But what you did say, and I'm asking a question, is that we aren't honestly going to know what there's other than the market hall. There's this 39,025 additional square footage, of which now there's pads right now, and we aren't really going to know what parking is required for those commercial pad applications until there's a developer. Is that correct?
That's generally correct, but the table that we put together is based on sort of a combination of the ANS site plans and everything else. And currently there is sufficient, what's programmed there has the space to be parked there. But it may evolve a little as people work out the details of the design, but they would have to meet that same requirement. So they would have to provide at that square footage, the obligation for those parcels in total would be 130 parking spaces. And as currently laid out, that appears to be something that can be accommodated on their current plans.
And it's your belief in that you stated already that that's going to be more than adequate for any commercial uses that are in addition to the market hall in this phase one.
That's our expectation based on the development partners that we've talked to for the market hall and the commercial use as a whole. But
okay, I think I'm clear. Are there any other commissioners that would like to ask questions of the applicant at this point? Commissioner Hudis, you had your hand up.
Sure. I did have a number of questions that essentially came from the public. And so I'd like to maybe see if I could get them correct. Mr. Lord and a number of residents have commented on the need to hold the developer responsible to what was agreed following the lawsuit. Was the outcome of the lawsuit satisfactory to the applicant? And if changes are requested now, over 3 years later, why didn't the applicant make the case for flexibility at the time during the legal process?
I think that we're pleased with the results of the project. I think we're very happy to be building this project in the town of Los Gatos. We would have preferred that there wasn't a lawsuit. As I mentioned before, we've worked on a number of projects in the town and think it's a great place to do business. As far as why we wouldn't have asked for parking changes earlier in the process, it takes a while to get a building of this type designed. It involves us working with a retail partner. We're mostly a for sale developer and not a retail developer. But the project was obligated to provide the affordable housing, and we wanted to provide the affordable housing. And that component of it is essential to the success of the residential portion of the project. So as we worked through the retail design and discussed it with potential partners, we felt that there was an opportunity to improve the project by reducing the parking in the basement.
Okay, and Commissioner Hughes, I think it's fine to ask a few more questions, but
Thank you. So these are questions that have pretty much come from the public, and I know it's difficult for the public to speak on these Zoom sessions. So, but they're questions that I think are important. In the justification letter, there's a statement that Grosvenor is no longer involved. How is that relevant to the parking requirements? How is that fact relevant?
Well, the original partnership between Summerhill and Grosvenor involved Grosvenor developing the market hall and the commercial paths. So when they chose not to move forward with that, we took that on. But as a part of doing that, we also are going to, maybe do it in a slightly different way. And so our change is based on what we think is the right thing to do for the project as a whole, as opposed to what Grosvenor might have been trying to accomplish.
So as a follow-up, was Summerhill compensated for that by Grosvenor already?
We don't usually talk about how our land transactions are structured. Grosvenor was the initial applicant, and when they chose not to move forward, we had the opportunity to take their position.
Well, the reason I'm asking is in the justification letter, you were talking about how much money will be saved by not doing this. And so I think it's legitimate to ask that question since you're using that for justification.
I'm not sure I understand. You're saying that if Grosvenor chose not to move forward with the project, that they should be compensated for it?
No, in your letter, you raised a justification point, which is that expenditure will be saved. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think we've mentioned that in our presentation and in the letter of justification, along with a number of other benefits.
Okay, so as a follow-on to that, has Summerhill already been compensated for those spaces that are now going to be removed?
So we haven't been paid anything by anybody because we haven't actually built any component of the project yet. So no one has, we have not received any revenue from the project that I'm aware
of. Okay, thank you.
Okay, now do any other commissioners have questions for the applicant?
And Chair, I just wanted to note for the record, this is Joel Paulson, Community Development Director, that Commissioner Birch had to step away. Obviously, she was recused from this. So if she comes back in before or after we get to the next item, I will be adding her to the group.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Okay, so I think we've asked quite a few questions and we did hear public comment and we have quite a few letters. So I'm going to suggest that we close the public portion of the public hearing and take time for the commissioners to ask additional questions for staff, comment on the application, and consider what kind of motion the commission would like to make on this matter. So, Commissioner Gatos has his hand up.
I did have some other questions that were raised. I just was sort of taking a break, but I did have a few more questions of the applicant.
Okay, I apologize. I misunderstood you. All right, so I will reopen the public portion of the hearing just to allow Commissioner Gatos to ask a few additional questions.
Okay, so this has to do with the configuration of the parking for the seniors. Ms. Peterson and Yanli Zhao pointed out that there could be safety implications of the reconfiguration. Could you discuss that? Is there anything to do with the way that this parking area will be configured and accessible that's different than the original underground parking for the seniors?
Is this a question for Summerhill?
Yes.
So this is Michael Keeney. The Eden portion of the building is unchanged. Their parking was programmed for the top floor adjacent to their units, and they never were programmed for any parking in the basement. So the third floor of the parking structure will be part of a commercial condominium that they will own, and it contains 47 of the 50 stalls, and the ramp from the second floor where the commercial parking is will have a security gate so that only residents or guests can get access to their spaces.
So the elimination of the basement parking will have no effect on the security measures or access that are being provided for the seniors. Is that correct?
No change. That's correct.
Okay. Another question, and this relates to the use of the parking in phase 2. So my understanding is that the additional parking was meant for phase 2, which is largely retail. Is that correct?
I'm not an expert on the second phase of the specific plan. Staff could maybe comment, but I believe it has a higher concentration of retail and office, yes.
I believe there's only 16 residential units in phase 2, is that correct?
I'm not sure the answer to that. I'm sure staff knows.
Okay, so is this change by eliminating the parking that would be used by phase 2 significantly changing the uses in that phase 2?
I'm like I said, I'm not extremely close to the phase 2 portion of the program, but the parking in the garage was, if had Grosvenor developed phase 2 in conjunction with phase 1, which I think at some point they intended, then there would have been an opportunity for the property owners, which would both have been Grosvenor, to negotiate easements with themselves to allow for shared uses of that parking. But the Market Hall building is a standalone structure that does not have any easement or legal obligation to provide parking to other components of the project. So I don't think it would change how phase 2 would be developed. It would be developed in compliance with the specific plan, and it would have the parking that's required based on the uses that were proposed, consistent with what's allowed by the specific plan.
Okay, thank you. That raises questions for staff that I'll ask later. Thanks.
Okay, and Vice Chair Janoff had her hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to be perfectly clear. We're talking about phase 1 and phase 2 as though they are now still connected in concept. And Mr. Keeney, if you could please restate, which I think you've done several times, that although Grosvenor had a plan for developing phase 1 and phase 2, the current situation is that Grosvenor is no longer a developer for the North 40 in any capacity, and Summerhill's interest is only in phase 1. Is that correct?
That's correct, but there are some things that, as the developer of phase 1, we have done to help provide future infrastructure for phase 2. So there are connections for storm lines, water lines, future road connections, are all consistent with the specific plan to allow phase 2 to develop per the specific plan, but it would be for the phase 2 developer to connect to those facilities, and their project would have to meet the requirements of the specific plan, just like phase 1 did.
Okay, so just
we're trying to provide as much infrastructure for them to build on top of ours as possible, but not necessarily something for their benefit and not for ours.
Okay, so just to further clarify, when we're talking about the requirements for parking, residential or commercial, the current scope is only for phase 1. You may have developed infrastructure that supports whatever happens in phase 2, but currently the Summerhill interest in terms of above ground square footage that would have a parking requirement, we're only talking about phase 1. Is that correct?
Yes, in regards to the structure. When it comes to something like the size of the storm drain, so it can handle the runoff from their property, we've accommodated that.
Okay, so I'm not talking about storm drains.
Itself, it's a standard.
Storm drains don't require parking. I'm only talking about what does require parking, and I think I'm clear that that any connection to phase 2 above ground build out that would have a parking interest in borrowing parking or counting parking from phase 2, that's no longer what we have before us. We are only working on phase 1 above ground parking requirements, which is the Summerhill scope. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I think that's clear. Thank you for your question. All right, so Commissioner Hudis, did you want to ask any more questions of the applicant, or do you want to save your questions for staff, or what?
I'm just looking at them. I think the rest of the questions are for staff at this point. It doesn't, maybe I'll just ask one last one, and that is that a number of residents raised the question about neighborhood impact and community benefit. Not much has been said about this. There's an aspect of this where the removal of the parking may cause a problem for the residents in nearby neighborhoods. It may cause the zoning of other areas to become an issue. Do you have any statement that you'd like to make about community benefit? You're asking for this reduction. Are you offering any additional open space or reduced density or reduced height? I know that it's not a requirement, but I'm asking this because you're asking for something that does affect the community.
Well, I think there were a number of community benefits identified at the time the project was approved, and we are of the opinion that this is a further community benefit that will improve the quality of the project and encourage the goals of the specific plan.
Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Badami.
To the applicant, can you just elaborate on how it would improve the quality of the project? Be a little bit more specific on that.
Well, one of the things that came up and led us to look into this was the preparation of the Transportation Demand Management Program. And one of the programs that was looked at was the fact that providing additional parking in a building has the opportunity to create more vehicle trips to the structure and discourage pedestrian and bicycle trips. So reducing unnecessary parking, I think, is considered a benefit for a transportation-oriented, a reduction in traffic and a pedestrian and bike-friendly project. And that's part of the reason the Silicon Bike Coalition provided a letter of support.
Thank you.
All right, Commissioner Hudis. You're on mute.
Now that that's been raised, I would be interested to know how much community benefit are we going to have by reducing the amount of parking, this induced demand that was stated. How much is that?
I don't have an answer for that. I'd have to consult with a transportation engineer to try and identify a percentage, but I think it's from the consultants that I've worked with, there's a general consensus that if there's less parking available, people are more likely to find another way to get there.
Okay.
And I guess more importantly, if there's enough parking to begin with, there's not really a benefit to providing that much more. So the project does have a number of bike corridors through it and around it, with improvements on Los Gatos Boulevard and Lark extending to the Los Gatos Creek Trail to improve the bicycle transportation network throughout the region and connect to regional facilities. And all that was done partly, I believe, at the direction of some of the members of the Planning Commission that were on the commission at the time the project was approved. I believe that was something that was added towards the end and expanded and enhanced. because it was something that the community and the commission and the council identified as a benefit to the community.
Thank you.
Commissioner Badami.
So I would just like to expand on your comment that if there's less parking available, the people are going to find another way to get there. But did you consider that people might give up and not go there because they can't find parking? Would that not affect the viability of the project?
I think that would be the case if you were going below what's required. So when you talk to the transportation demand management people, that's what they would like. They would like to see even greater reductions. We're providing 60% more parking than's required. It just seems unnecessary to go above and beyond that.
Okay. Anything else before we close the public hearing? Okay. I think we are, Commissioner Barnett.
Yes, some of the members of the public were concerned about increased circulation in the development because of the lack of parking and possibly raising safety issues. I was wondering if you had any comment on that.
Well, we're completing over $10 million in improvements in and around the project site on Los Gatos Boulevard and Lark, which includes improved bike corridors, crosswalks, signal improvements, a number of improvements to help improve pedestrian safety at all of those kind of pretty significant intersections and bring them up to a current and enhanced standard. So I think the project as a whole is going to greatly improve the pedestrian safety in the neighborhood.
My question is whether circulation by cars who are looking for parking might create itself a problem and even a safety issue.
If we were parked at below the ratios that are required, then that would be a concern of ours. But since we're 60% in excess of what the town's code requires, and we're very comfortable that there's adequate parking for the uses that we're proposing.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. So last call for questions of the applicant before I close the public hearing. Going once. Okay. All right. So we're going to close the public portion of the public hearing. And now I will ask if any commissioners have additional questions to ask of staff, wish to make comments on the application or introduce a motion for consideration by the commission. All right, I will go with Vice Chair Janoff and then Commissioner Gatos has his hand up.
This is a question for Town Attorney. Did you have an opportunity to check the applicability of the Housing Affordability Act on what we have before us?
So I did. So the HAA states, as Ms. Risto stated, was mixed use developments consisting of residential and non-residential uses with at least 2/3 of the square footage designated for residential use. Since this is an amendment to the approved architectural site approval for phase 1, staff and I used the entire phase project to reach the conclusion that it meets the requirements of the mixed use and that HAA apply. We didn't look at it from just the market senior housing space project. If PC does not agree with that conclusion, then it should make the specific findings that the HAA does not apply.
Thank you.
Commissioner Gatos, did you still want to ask a question?
Yes, thank you. Coming back to that, this information that was provided during the hearing by council and was provided in a note to us several hours before was not provided to the public. And so the public has struggled with their questions and with framing that in the context of the HAA. Not that they're all expected to be expert in the HAA. Wouldn't we normally give the public some time to react to those criteria that are then being used in the hearing?
So since 2015, I've issued many memos and opinions regarding the HAA and how it is applied to town projects. It was not in this staff report. I apologize for that. I can regurgitate all those staff reports and white papers again if Planning Commission wants to continue it for that basis.
I'm going to say something now that a concern I had in listening to the public hearing, so I'm making a comment, is that as Commissioner Hughes stated, some members of the public were struggling with this new information to them, because if I'm going to net out what I thought I heard from the public was a combination of two general areas. One is that that there was some grounds for the fact that the development plans that were submitted that said they were going to do this underground parking garage should mean that they're held to that. But instead, that's not really an objective standard like the parking requirements are. And then there's a whole nother category of comments from the public where there's disbelief about the parking requirements being adequate for what they perceive will happen when all those people move in, and so on and so forth. That being the case, I feel uncomfortable with there being any possibility whatsoever that the Housing Accountability Act might possibly not apply. That people would have more chance to at least consider it, and and get comfortable with it, and maybe make the comments that they would have made having that information. So that was just a thought I had going through this thing, and that made me uncomfortable. And some of the people that spoke are some of our most, involved community members. So I don't know what other commissioners think.
So just as one other comment,
yeah,
because I've heard a couple times about an agreement for the project. There was no agreement for this project. This went through a normal approval project, even though it was in litigation. We rescinded our denial and granted approval of the project. That gives the applicant on any project to come in and ask for modifications. The only way you can prevent that is by actually entering into an agreement, what's called a development agreement. And we did not do that in phase one. We're considering that, and hopefully that can happen in phase two, so that if you get public benefits or you get agreements on stuff that's not required by town code, then you can hold them to that commitment. But the idea that there was an agreement to do an underground structure is not a correct statement, because we do not have any agreement. The analogy I've used is if they had said they were going to build a 30-foot sound wall, even though the CEQA documents or the requirements was a 20-foot sound wall, they could come in and ask for that modification. And so long as they met the CEQA requirements and met the zoning code, then it would be allowed. And that's kind of here is at least, and I'm not a math expert, but at least if they've met the requirements of the parking, then under the HAA and really under any other findings, the project should be approved.
Okay, so you answered the question that I wanted to ask earlier, which was, because I know not everyone in the public understands this process. So when Summerhill Grosvenor submitted the original architecture and site for this project, they submit a series of development plans. That's what happens with every approval we do for architecture and site. So when we approve it, we usually say in accordance with the development plans attached as exhibit, blah, blah, blah. But so I think what you're saying is that even though they submit those plans, it's not a legally binding agreement that everything in that plan is going to be exactly the way it was, unless we created a development agreement. Did I get that right?
Well, they have to go by the conditions of approval unless they come in for a modification, and that's what they've done.
Right.
But so the comments that there was an agreement that was reached between the town and the developer, and they're not upholding that agreement, is not a correct statement. There is no agreement signed by both parties that this is exactly what's going to be done. It allows for modifications. Even our specific plan allows for modifications to the approvals.
Okay, Thank you very much. All right, so I'd like to hear from other commissioners about, where we think we are. So, we know that we know what feedback we've gotten from the public so far. We have some people from the public that asked for more time. I think we're clear on what the parking requirements are. And so what do my fellow commissioners think about what we should do as our next step in terms of a motion? And it's fine to make comments without making a motion. Vice Chair Janoff.
Okay, this is not a motion, just a couple of questions. Question for Town Attorney. Mr. Schultz, if we were to agree that HAA is not applicable to the matter before us, would it be your opinion, and I'll ask staff separately, would it be your opinion that there is still no objective criteria that the proposed change doesn't meet? In other words, would you say that the project still meets the technical and objective requirements of the specific plan, the general plan, and the zoning code, and the housing element? So my question is, assuming the HAA isn't applicable here, are we at the same place in terms of your opinion in regard to objective standards?
So I got a little bit confused with your question. If the HAA does apply, if it does not apply, then you still should be using your standards and criteria, and it meets its parking regulations. You're still going to have to come up with findings as to what it does not comply with. You just can use subjective reasons also,
okay.
But you're going to have specific findings.
So my question, I'll ask staff. Would it still be your opinion if we didn't take HAA into consideration? Would it be staff's opinion that the project as proposed still meets all town criteria?
So staff's opinion would be that it meets the parking requirements for town code and per the specific.
Yes, I concur with that as well.
Okay, so back to the question of the chair. I think given the late receipt of the statement from the town attorney and the way that it describes the criteria to be met and what the obligations of the Planning Commission are, I think it's fair to say that the public requires the opportunity to look at those words carefully and follow up on the documents referenced so that we're all on board. I think those of us who have had a little bit more time to think about where we are and the criteria required for us to deny the application before us, we may be in a different position thought-wise, but I think until everyone is at the same place with the same knowledge, it would be inadvisable for us to proceed with a vote tonight to approve or deny the application. So I would be in favor of a continuance. I don't like the idea of dragging this out continually, but I think there's just too much of a left, a curveball that came too late for public to really understand.
Commissioner Tejada.
After hearing everything tonight, I would definitely have to say I am opposed, and I would deny this tonight based on what I've heard. I feel the burden of responsibility comes on Summerhill Homes to present subjective proof as to why they want to make this change. So I would definitely say I would be comfortable denying it tonight or continuing based on what everybody else in the commission wants to do.
So Commissioner Tejada, I'd like to ask you a question back. What grounds, because we would have to have, supposing we have findings, what were your thoughts when you're thinking about where your position stood about what grounds we have for.
I guess we don't
tonight.
know necessarily whether the HAA applies currently tonight. I haven't got a clear understanding of whether or not it is applicable. And I just feel there's a sincere lack of good faith in this project. So if it was approved at 303 original parking spots, why is it okay to go down to 179? Where is that justification? I haven't seen that tonight. You know, it could be 124. That's all that's required by the town. But I don't necessarily see how we can go from 303 to 179 with no justification here other than that Grosvenor is no longer part of the project. That's kind of where I'm at right now with this reasoning.
Well, it's in the specific plan, but thank you for sharing that. Okay, so thank you for your comments. Commissioner Hudis.
And just to be clear before is I'm fine with doing a memorandum to the public and to Planning Commission if they want to continue it. But my opinion will be that it has to comply with HAA because this is an amendment to phase 1, which is the entire phase 1 project. And that's the way it's come in, and that's the way my analysis will be in that. So there isn't any, as far as my conclusion, it applies whether you can find objective standards based on the evidence and the math of doing it, or whether you haven't been convinced that they've shown how the calculations project out is an issue for Planning Commission to decide.
Okay. Commissioner Hudis.
And, you know, adding to comments, I would be in favor of continuing the item, if only for the reason that we owe it to the public with this information that was provided to us just a few hours before the hearing is also, I think, valuable information for the public, particularly since there's a difference of opinion between some members of the public and with the very late breaking information that it would be wise to allow this enough time for the public to understand that basis and the implications of making a decision under the HAA versus not. I did have 3 other questions, and if there were to be a continuance, I would wonder whether it would be appropriate to ask them now or to do that at another time. So I'm just sort of putting that out there.
I'm going to suggest that if it sounds like there's some momentum for a continuance, although we don't have a motion at this point, then I would say defer any questions till then. But although I want to ask staff a question before we make a motion on continuing or not, if supposing that it is the will of the commission to continue, since I've already closed the public hearing, one of the reasons we've been continuing so that to allow the public time to respond and comment on the possibility of additional objective standards that we haven't thought of, or the applicability of the Housing Accountability Act. And we do have people in town that are very thorough and will do their homework as well. Will we be able to reopen public comments if we continue?
So I'd look to the town attorney. You always have that option to reopen for additional public comment at the next hearing, even if it's continued. That's generally something that hasn't happened often unless there was significant change in the project. But I believe, and the town attorney can confirm, that's up to you and you can make that determination.
So in this case, I would state that you would want to reopen the public comment, because the reason why you're continuing is because of the issue with the HAA. And therefore, you know, you'll want to hear from the public as to the reasoning behind that.
Okay, good. That helps a lot. Commissioner Badami.
I would just like to provide my comments, and I did recommend a continuance at the start of the public hearing 2 hours ago. My position has not changed, so I would be in support of a motion to continue.
Would you like to make that motion?
Certainly. I move to continue architecture and site application S-20-012, consideration of an approval of a request for modification to an existing architecture and site application to remove underground parking for construction of a commercial building, the Market Hall, in the North 40 specific plan area. I would look to staff to determine a date certain.
September 23rd.
All right, I'd like to include that in my motion, the date of September 23rd.
Okay, Commissioner Hudis.
I would second the motion and also ask the town attorney, Mr. Schultz, if it's appropriate to make available to the public the information that you provided to the Planning Commission, since they're going to be provided an opportunity for public hearing.
So the analysis will be part of the staff report that comes out before the next meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, all right, so we have a motion and a second. Is there any further comments or discussion that commissioners would like to make at this point? Commissioner Barnett.
I suggest that the motion include the continuance with public hearing as well.
I would agree to add that to my motion.
And Commissioner Hudis, do you?
Yes, I agree.
Okay, so the motion as amended, are there any other comments or that commissioners or questions that commissioners have before we take a roll call vote? Okay, seeing none, I will do the roll call vote and please answer yes, no, or abstain. So I'll start with Commissioner Badami.
Yes.
Commissioner Tavana.
Yes.
And let's see, Commissioner Hudis,
Yes.
Commissioner Barnett,
Yes.
Vice Chair Janoff,
Yes.
and I vote yes as well. So it passes unanimously. And Mr. Paulson, are there appeal rights for this action by the commission?
Chair Hansen, no, they're not appeal rights because an action has not been taken other than continuing it to a future public hearing.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, so I'm going to recommend that we take a 5 minute, is 5 minutes long enough, or do we need a 10-minute break? Because it is 9 o'clock and we do have 2 more items plus other business. So what do you guys think, 5 minutes or 10? 5? All right, so let's be back in 5 minutes, and it is, it's just around 9 o'clock, so we'll be back by 9:05, okay? Paulson there?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, we don't, there is Commissioner Birch. That was what I was going to ask about. So it looks like she's here, just needs to be on video. Perfect. Okay, so if we have everyone, let's go ahead and continue because we still have 2 more items to get through. So we will now move on to item 3, which is requesting approval for demolition of an existing single-family residence and detached accessory dwelling unit and construction of a 2-story single-family residence on property zoned HR1. The APN number is 527-02-007. And the architecture and site application is S-19-02, and it's located at 15925 Quail Hill Drive. The applicant is Gary Kolstad. Property owners are John and Allison, excuse me if I pronounce your name, Deep. So hopefully that's close. May I see a show of hands from commissioners that have visited the site? Okay. Are there any disclosures by commissioners on this item? Okay, seeing none. I understand Ms. Armour will be giving the staff report for this item.
Yes, good evening. Good evening, Chair, Vice Chair, Commissioners. The project in front of you is the proposal to demolish an existing residence and detached accessory dwelling unit and construction of a new 2-story single-family residence with below-grade attached garage. This is a new plan with a major redesign and new architect involved to replace the proposed house that was brought before you for review on December 11th of 2019. In response to the comments received at that meeting, a new design was developed. The proposed project does still require or request exceptions for cut, fill, and retaining wall height, but no longer requests an exception for the overall height of the building as the previous design did. The revised findings and considerations provided as Exhibit 17 to the staff report for this evening's meeting does take that change in the exceptions into consideration. In addition to the overall design change, there is also a change described in the applicant's supplemental materials as Exhibits 19, 20, and 21 that was made late in the staff review of the process or of the project. To correct a floor area calculation error, the applicant is proposing to sink the house an additional 6 inches down. This is captured in the revised conditions of approval. It's condition of approval 3 in Exhibit 16. And all of the numbers, tables and numbers in the staff report do reflect that additional lowering of the house by 6 inches. Staff is now recommending approval of the project. This concludes staff's presentation, but I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you very much, Ms. Armour. And it looks like we have a question from Commissioner Gatos.
Thank you. I may have missed it, but in the application that we saw in December, there was a table showing square footage in FAR relative to the neighborhood. And I may have missed it, but was there not one in this package, and is there a reason why it's not needed?
The changes in floor area are very minimal in terms of countable floor area. And so you can look back at that previous table since there haven't been substantial changes in the neighborhood.
Okay, thank you. I'll have some questions using that table.
All right, now do other commissioners have questions of staff at this point? All right, seeing none, then we will now open the public hearing and first give the applicant an opportunity to address the commission for up to 5 minutes. So it looks like Mr. Kolstad has his hand up. Director Paulson, are you able to promote Mr. Kolstad?
I believe I am, if I can figure out which button to push. Hold on 1 second. There we go, Ms. Kolstad. You should be able to speak at this point.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can.
There, very good. Good evening, planning commissioners. This is Gary Colsat, the architect for the project. I want to also let everybody know that with me virtually is my team. So we have the civil engineer, Amanda Mousse-Verdell from Hannah Bernetti, and we have the landscape architect, David Fox, on hand should you have any questions. However, I'm going to be doing the majority of the presentation tonight. So I am very happy and honored to be the architect and the applicant on this project for John and Allison Diep. This was something that I kept my eye on for a while because I have a project going on across the street. And in looking at this, the application and reading the minutes and watching the tape and everything like that, it was clear to me that we needed to take a whole new approach on this. And so I treated it like it was a new project. I didn't really look at what was there before. So the first thing you'll see obviously is the architecture. It's completely different. This is done in a contemporary style, which I feel is appropriate for the more rural situation, the conditions that we have on this hillside. You don't see a lot of formality in this project. The other thing that's maybe not as obvious, but it's the approach that we took to the overall massing of the project, the overall grading and excavation, and where everything is much less extreme. This, it's even beginning with the entry. I placed the entry that faces Drysdale, which will be, by the way, to clarify, this will be the new address on Drysdale. We're still using the official Quail Hill address. So I wanted to give something to the street. I wanted to change the orientation and make it more friendly to the neighborhood. And then specifically, we did a lot less excavation. Our vertical cuts on the interior of the project, which are all basement, have been reduced significantly from before. This is obviously a very challenging property with very steep slopes, not a lot of flat area to build. So the house that we have is in a very similar location as the original one, because that's where the driveway comes in very well. It's below the existing cottage and the main house. The architecture review done by Canon Design Group was very well received, and with no recommendations at all to change or modify the architecture. He specifically pointed out a few landscape items and some landscape screening concepts that he wanted us to address, and those were addressed by Mr. Fox, and that letter is in your packet. We are asking for a few exceptions, and the big one is for the garages. We took the approach of doing more conventional garages rather than an underground parking structure. You have a lot less area required to park more conventionally, pulling in and pulling out, rather than having to worry about backup space and turning around and things like that. So we've reduced the amount of cut and excavation considerably for our garage level. But we do, in order to make that work, we have to cut 7 or 8.5 feet, I think, for the garage and the one corner. If you look at our exhibit that shows the exceptions, that we tried to color code them for what is cut, what is fill, and identify what the max numbers are in those particular situations. The other exception we're asking for is at the entry. The other major exception, the other ones are I'm calling more minor, but the entry, we are trying to open that up just a little bit more and ask for some more cut for some taller light wells so we can really expose the entry door and the windows next to it. Even though we're doing that, these cuts are not visible from the street. So I think that's important when you consider the exceptions that we're asking for. The other exceptions are above the house to create a little courtyard and light well. So you're not looking at an 8-foot tall hillside. We've terraced that hill back a little bit. And finally, I want to talk about some site restoration. This was not addressed very well in the previous application. We are removing both existing structures, but the original main house had quite a bit of fill that pushed out over the ledge, and it created very steep slopes. And
Chair,
they're
that's fine.
not stable, so we are proposing to do a naturalization of that hill. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you for your comments. Let's see if any commissioners have questions for the applicant. Commissioner Hudes.
Thank you. With regard to the square footage, is the FAR as represented in the previous application? And I did analysis and presented that at the last hearing, that it was 46% larger than the average of the neighborhood. Is that still the case?
I'm not sure what the average is in the neighborhood. Right now, we are at the 5,100 square feet FAR.
Well, there was a table that was presented in the last package that isn't in this one, that in my calculation would put it at 46% above the average. So if it hasn't, if the square footage hasn't changed very much, I think it's less than 25 square feet, then I would think that would be correct, that it would still be 46% above the average.
Could I ask you a clarification question?
Sure.
Are you talking about the above the counted square footage or the overall gross square footage?
No, I'm talking about the what's used in the town's FAR calculation. I believe that's okay. What was in the previous package.
I don't know if Mrs. Armour can pull up that table, but I can tell you across the street, the house is 5,400 square feet, which is larger than this one. I know that the house up on the hill, Mr. Haley's house, is at 6,000. So that's off the top of my head. I know the house above the home that I did was relatively large as well on Drysdale. That's all I can speak of from my general knowledge.
Okay, thank you. I had a couple other questions about the architecture and Mr. Cannon's report. I believe there were 4 or 5 items in Mr. Cannon's report. Were each of those addressed?
Every one of those was addressed, and that is in the letter by Mr. Fox. And if you look at the report, you'll see that he actually made some specific recommendations in regard to the landscaping, and specifically the landscaping and not the architecture of the house. If you look at page 3 of his report, which is page 67 of your package, Mr. Cannon he has a bullet point list of several items that he says that we actually achieved, which it's just in quote, it was well designed with attention to the town's hillside development standards and design guidelines. And then he says some specific positive design elements of the design include the following. And he lists 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 items, such as low profile building masses that step up with the natural grade, articulated facades, recessed garage doors, projecting eyebrow canopies and roof eaves to provide facade texture and shadows, high quality materials consistent with the design guidelines, including stone and wood siding, varied exterior materials to provide facade variety, and visually break the structure into smaller elements. Low stone retaining walls that step and blend with the grade, and live oak landscaping in the front setback.
Okay, so we all have a copy of the architect or the consulting architecture report, but thank you for recapping it, Commissioner Gatos. And then I have some other commissioners that have questions.
My question was about the cut, and my understanding is that there's an exception. There's additional cut that's required by this because it's 6 inches lower. If that's correct, could the ceiling heights of each story be reduced by 3 inches to achieve this without additional cut?
No, the garage and the main floor needed to come down 6 inches because it's a product of how the house sits in relationship to the contour itself. And so if we move the house up and down, we can achieve those technicalities specifically. If we move the house forward or backward, we can't. If we shrink the height of the house, we'd still have to start at the bottom. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. That was the question.
All right, and let's see, Commissioner Badami had her hand up, and then also Commissioner Janoff. So Commissioner Badami first.
Thank you. To Commissioner Hudis's inquiry, I do happen to have a copy of the chart that was provided in our staff report back on December 9th of 2019. I don't know how to put it up on my computer so that everybody could see, and I'm not sure if Jennifer Armour has it, but let me just tell you that 4 of the homes were in the 2,000 square foot range. 5 of the homes, there we go. 5 of the homes were in the 4,000 square foot range, and 4 of them were in the 5,000 square foot range. I think I got that right, but we can see for ourselves, if that helps, Commissioner Hudis.
Yeah, thank you. That's exactly what I was looking for. And I believe when I did the calculation, it was 46% above average.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, Vice Chair Janoff.
Thank you. A question for Mr. Colsat. One of the recommendations from the architect was to select roofing colors to blend with the home color and natural environment. Can you comment about whether that change was made? That is not a landscaping change.
You're exactly right, and I apologize for that. That was in reference to our flat roofs, which are not visible from any public location, and only if you're in the tree or something like that. However, we're planning to use a dark charcoal gray color, which blends in with the rest of the project and will not stick out.
So
it's a membrane roof.
Is the color of the membrane roof darker than what Mr. Cannon reviewed?
Yeah.
Great, thank you very much.
Okay, do other commissioners have questions? I have a question for the applicant. We did get one letter in our packet from the neighbors saying, or a neighbor saying, it was a desk item actually, saying they were in support of the project, but since this is a new design, have you done neighborhood outreach, and what has the reaction been?
Yes, thank you for the question. I did run out of time. That was part of the highlight I wanted to mention. We did speak with all of the neighbors, and none of them had any complaints or concerns. The one neighbors to the west of us, we actually met at their house, and what they wanted to make sure is that the fence that we put up between our 2 properties is similar to one that is there now, because that's what matches all their other fencing, and that was their request that we match their fence, and we agreed to that.
Okay, so to your knowledge, based on the contacts you made with neighbors, there's been no objections to this, only the one discussion about making sure that the fence material was the same.
To my knowledge, everybody is in support.
Okay. Now, do any other commissioners have questions of the applicant? Commissioner Barnett.
I'm somewhat confused about the ADU. As I read the materials, it appeared that there's an existing ADU of 1,422 square feet. I was wondering what the intention is to remove that, replace it, or what the intention is.
Yes, both of the structures that are there now, the main house, which is on the very plateau, and then the ADU, which is the pole house, will both be removed. And at this time, we are not proposing any new ADU. It's obviously a very steep site, but at this time, all we're doing is restoring that hillside more. We're taking away the fill slope, and both of those structures do come down.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Okay.
Okay, are there any other commissioners that have questions for the applicant? All right, doesn't look like we do. So then we will move to the public comments portion of the hearing. And do we have any members of the public that would like to speak on this item?
Thank you, Chair Hansen. I don't currently see any other members of the public wishing to speak on this item. If you wish to speak on this item, please raise your hand. I don't see anyone raising their hand, Chair.
Okay, so then it doesn't look like we have any public comments other than the desk item that we received earlier today. So we will now give the applicant up to 3 more additional minutes to add any further comments about the application.
Okay.
Mr. Culseth, do you wish to make any more comments?
Thank you. I just wanted to summarize by saying that all of us on the design team feel very confident about the design that we presented. In fact, the entire application, we've really worked hard on this to fit it into this very difficult hillside. We think that the architecture is very appropriate and will be very handsome, and the size of the house, after looking at the charts, I saw a lot of 4,000 and 5,000 square foot homes on that chart. I can't do the math. I know you guys had a lot of math earlier tonight, so I just want to leave that. I think it's not the largest house in the neighborhood, or the smallest. So I do thank you for this opportunity. And I think that I'd just like to close it with, look forward to hearing what you guys have to say.
Hey, thank you very much. Do any commissioners have any additional questions for the applicant at this time before I close the public hearing? It doesn't look like I do. So we will now close the public portion of this hearing and ask if any commissioners have questions of staff, wish to comment on the application, or introduce a motion for consideration. Commissioner Hudis.
I would just like to say that at the last hearing, I had a lot of comments about the architecture not fitting the hillside design guidelines and standards. And I don't have any of those concerns at this point. I think the choice of materials, in particular, the use of the wood and the stone, as well as the tones that have been chosen, but also the simplicity of the architecture in that setting is such that it doesn't raise any of those concerns at all. In fact, I would comment that I think the home is very beautiful and would be a real addition in the form that it's in.
Thank you for your comments. I will comment as well, and then Commissioner Badami, but I also thought, since we heard this back in December, I remember that the commission had many comments basically saying go back to the drawing board, and it looks like that's happened. And this looks like a much improved application, and is corroborated by the consulting architect's comments. So I don't have any big red flags. Commissioner Badami.
All right, I'll go ahead and make a motion. So I move to approve architecture and site application S-19-012, requesting approval for demolition of an existing single-family residence and detached accessory dwelling unit and construction of a 2-story single-family residence on property zoned HR1. I can make the required findings for CEQA. I can make the required findings for the demolition of a single-family residence and an accessory dwelling unit. I can also make the findings that it's compliant with the hillside development standards and guidelines. I can also find compliance with the hillside specific plan. And these considerations were made in review of architecture and site applications as required by section 29.20.150 of the town code.
And are you also including the terms and conditions?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, okay, all right. And do I have a second? Vice Chair Janoff.
Second.
Okay. Are there any other additional comments or questions on this application before we do our vote? All right, seeing none, we will do our roll call vote, and I will start with Commissioner Badami.
Yes.
Commissioner Tabana.
Yes.
Commissioner Birch.
Yes.
Commissioner Hudis.
Yes.
Commissioner Barnett.
Yes.
Vice Chair Janoff.
Yes.
And I vote yes as well, so it passes unanimously. And Mr. Paulson, are there any appeal rights for this action by the commission?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So anyone who's not satisfied with the Planning Commission's decision can appeal that decision to the Town Council. Appeal forms are available online, must be submitted within 10 days of this action, and there is a fee for filing the appeal.
Very good. Thank you very much. So now we get to move on to item 4, which is to consider a request for approval of a variance from the town code to exceed the maximum allowable sign area and an exception from the commercial design guidelines to exceed the maximum letter height for a wall sign for Sephora on property zoned C-2 LHP-PD located at 50 University Avenue, Suite B260. APN number 529-02-044, variance application V-20-001. Property owner is SRI Old Town LLC, and the applicant is Peter Liu. May I see a show of hands from commissioners that have visited the site? Okay. Are there any disclosures? All right, seeing none, I believe Ms. Walters will be giving the staff report tonight.
Yes, good evening. The subject site is located in the Old Town Shopping Center on the first floor of the main building. The retail tenant space is currently under construction. The applicant has proposed a wall sign and awning signage on the building's exterior. The applicant is requesting approval for a variance from the town code for a sign area of 72.82 square feet, where 51.66 square feet is allowed based on the primary business frontage. In addition, the applicant is also requesting approval for an exception from the commercial design guidelines for a 30-inch wall sign letter height, where a maximum of 12 inches is allowed in the C2 district. A letter of justification for the proposed project can be found in an Exhibit 5, and sign plans can be found in Exhibit 9. Tonight, there is a desk item that includes photo simulations showing the difference between the allowed 12-inch letter height and the proposed 30-inch letter height viewed from University Avenue. Please note that on Exhibit 8 in the staff report that was included in error, and Exhibit 8 should be the site's master sign program. Staff has reviewed the proposed signage, and it does comply with the master sign program. This concludes staff report, and we are available for questions.
Do any commissioners have questions for staff? Commissioner Badami.
Okay, so for staff, per Exhibit 5, the applicant's letter of justification stated that there's the appearance of other sign exceptions in surrounding shopping centers. Do we have any record of that where we've made previous exceptions? Do we have that information, or is that just an observation perhaps that the applicant made?
It is an observation that the applicant made. There isn't a formal exception allowed. Within the shopping center, the staff report does show that there are wall signage, letter height that does exceed that 12 inches allowed in the commercial design guidelines.
Okay, thank you.
To follow up on Commissioner Badami's question, if I read this right, there is a table that showed the sign letter height of some of the other retailers in that area. And then I think the ones that were above that, and I'm asking a question of Ms. Walters, they were before there was a sign standard? Because like Talbot's is 30 inches where it's supposed to be 12. So that, but they did their sign before we put this code in place, right?
Yes, they were approved prior to the adoption of the commercial design guidelines.
Commercial design, yeah, it's not code, it's design guidelines. Okay.
Which do describe the, suggest the sign letter height.
Okay, thank you. Do other, Vice Chair Jana.
Thank you. Question for Ms. Walters. Can you advise what the maximum height of the Sephora letter would be if it met the 51 square foot requirement? Would it be as small as 12 inches or as short as 12 inches, or would it be 15 or 18? Do you happen to know?
So on page 7 of the staff report, there is a table that describes different wall sign letter height, a range. And so in order to meet the total sign area, it would be 18 inches would be the largest. I'm sure you could also, there's probably some variance between the 18 and 24, but we've recorded the 18.
Thank you.
And just for additional, if you look at that table, 24-inch letters is 52.18, where 51.66 is allowed, and 18 inches 33.65. So it's actually probably just shy of 24 inches that would be allowed and still meet the wall sign requirement.
Okay, that's good to know. Are there other questions from commissioners for staff? Okay, so then if there are no questions, we will go on and give the applicant an opportunity to address the commission for up to 5 minutes. And is there someone from the applicant that would like to speak?
So if the member of the applicant's team that would like to speak will raise their hand, you'll be acknowledged. So I am going to allow Natalia Shorten to speak.
Okay, so Ms. Shorten, you have up to 5 minutes to address the commission about your application.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, Chair, Vice Chair, and Commissioners, as well as anyone from the public that might still be hanging on with us. To introduce myself, I'm Natalia Shorten, Senior Director of Store Design at Sephora. And I first wanted to thank you for considering our request tonight. And second, Sephora is very excited to be coming to Los Gatos. As you know, we're here requesting the sign variance. We are proposing a 30-inch sign height versus the 12-inch height that has been indicated by the signage criteria. I believe this is a modest and reasonable request, as well as an appropriate size that responds to our proximity, as well as architectural building proportions. The following, I just wanted to point out, are the most consequential items, I think, from Sephora's point of view. As you can see on page 221 through 224 of the agenda, as well as the desktop item 4 that we sent through earlier today, we're really looking at our store sign, and will our store be visible from the main road? And you can see from the renderings, our sign wouldn't be visible at all at 12 inches. It is more visible, although we still feel that's modest at 30 inches. I'm sure you're also going to see on the 12-inch elevation rendering just how small the sign looks, and it's swimming on that large storefront facade. We really are looking at the architecture and what's appropriate for our store specifically. We believe that small of a sign looks somewhat of a mistake, and 30 inches looks more appropriate in relationship to the architectural proportions. We don't, also, you guys have already talked about this, but the request to attain 30-inch height letters on our storefront isn't unprecedented. Talbot's currently has 30-inch sign height. I understand you guys said that that's prior to the, it's prior to the design guidelines that we're currently adhered to. However, it's great for business to be able to pull people into the center. I'm wondering, Aaron, is it possible if we could pull up the 3-page PDF that I had emailed out this afternoon? That would be awesome. Thank you. So we approximately measured out for the following 3 tenants. The first one is White House Black Market, and it is recorded that they have a 12-inch sign. However, that 12 inches only refers to the main top logo, and it's double stacked. So if you take that overall height, that's approximately measured to 22 inches. If we could go to Wine Cellar Restaurant, that is also double stacked. And while the W is 17 inches and the C is 24 inches, the overall sign height is 32 inches. I mean, I agree with these sizes of signs given the facade that they're on, given the expanse of the building that they're on. And then if we could go to the last one, the Steamer's Grill House, that sign letter height is not recorded in the package, but you can see that they are also considerably larger, and their overall sign height actually measures out to 46 inches. And so then my last point is that, we did go to our co-tenants and receive letters from them. Majority of them wrote to us that they had no problems with our 30-inch sign height request. And several co-tenants even went so far to state that they really encourage that, and they encourage promoting and driving business to the center. I think that, this is a unique center, obviously, and there are visibility concerns. So we really just want to do the best that we can and, drive traffic to the center, which helps Los Gatos. So.
All right. Does that conclude your presentation?
Yes, thank you very much.
All right. Do any commissioners have questions for the applicant? Commissioner Badami.
There's been much anticipation for Sephora to open here. So my question to the applicant is, do you even need a sign?
I do love that comment. I love that. But I mean, of course we do, because as much as there is people who know that we may be coming and we may be there, there are equally as many, or if not more, that don't.
Thank you.
Do any other Vice Chair Janoff?
Thank you. I echo Commissioner Badami's comments. I don't need a sign to know where I need to go. But my question to Ms. Shorten is, given how close 24-inch height would be to meeting the town's guidelines, did you do an assessment of that height of sign versus the 30-inch sign?
I did. As a matter of fact, we looked at it extensively, and I really am pushing, and I do very much feel that the 30-inch is actually just the appropriate sign for the proportions of the architectural facade and to get the visibility. You still are not really getting the visibility even at 24, and it is still feeling a little bit small on the, if you will, the forehead of our storefront.
Thank you.
Just to follow up on Vice Chair Janoff's question, did the rendering that we got sent in the desk item today is at the 30 inches, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. All right. So do any other commissioners have questions of the applicant? All right, seeing none, we will now move on to public comments and see if there's anyone in the public that would like to speak on this item.
So if anyone would like to speak from the public on this item, please use the raise hand feature. I don't see anyone raising their hand, Chair Hansen.
Okay. All right, well then, it doesn't look like we have any public comments, but we will give the applicant an opportunity to address the commission for up to an additional 3 minutes. Is there anything else that you wanted to present?
I don't think so. I mean, I think all of those points are out there and we've all seen the materials. So we're just waiting to hear what you guys have to say.
Okay, that sounds great. So then I'm going to close the public portion of the public hearing and ask if commissioners have questions of staff, wish to comment on the application or introduce a motion. I see Commissioner Birch has her hand up.
Yeah, I have more of a comment than a question, just that I feel in the situation where this is, the larger sign does in fact feel more to scale with the size of the vertical face of the building and with the trees that you see along University. It wouldn't otherwise be an easy sign to see. And we do know that there's obviously some vacancies and things coming up in the area. So something that would drive extra foot traffic is a huge plus to me. So I would support this variance.
Thank you. Commissioner Gatos.
Yeah, I would support the variance for a little bit different reason. I think that we have the sign ordinance that we have to live with. And so I don't find it compelling that it's not visible from the road, because that's what the sign ordinance was designed to do. And so it would be difficult for me to justify it on that basis, because then it doesn't really do much. But where I see it is on the architectural merits, in that I think that the sign the space is somewhat equivalent to Talbot's. Looking at the balance of the facade of the building, I find that it is very much in keeping. And so it isn't a matter of who got a big sign, who didn't. To me, it's the overall impact of this in the architecture in which it's being placed. So these are not standalone buildings by any means. It's one unit, and I think it would be out of balance to put a sign that's too small over this prominent space.
Thank you. Commissioner Badami.
I could support the exception. We've got retail suffering in so many ways. This could be a boon to Old Town and complement some of the surrounding businesses. And I think it's really important right now. So I would support the exception.
Vice Chair Jana.
I too support the exception. And I'd just like to say thank you to the applicant for the desk item. Seeing the renderings with the scale sign really was a compelling exhibit for me, particularly when you're looking at the distance that the storefront is from the street. I think that the size of the proposed signage makes good sense.
Thank you. And I'll comment as well. My first reaction as I was reading through before I saw the rendering was I was looking at the public comments or the other tenant comments, and there was a couple of people that said, I'd rather have it at 24 inches. But then when I saw the rendering, I thought I wouldn't really want it to be any smaller than that. And plus, we really do need Sephora to be successful in this area, as well as other, we need to help other retailers as well as much as we can. So I'm supportive of the change. So if I could get a motion from one of the commissioners, that would be great. Commissioner Badami.
I'll make a motion. So I move to approve variance application V-20-001. Request for approval for a variance from the town code to exceed the maximum allowable sign area and an exception from the commercial design guidelines to exceed the maximum letter height for a wall sign on property zoned C2 LHP PD. I can make the required findings for CEQA. I can make the required findings for granting a variance application to exceed the maximum allowable sign area. I can make the finding for the plan development ordinance. I can make the finding for the master sign program, and I can make the finding for compliance with the commercial design guidelines.
And can I have a second of Commissioner Birch?
Yeah, I will second the motion.
All right, thank you. Any other additional comments before we take a vote? All right, then we will go ahead with our roll call vote, and I will start with Commissioner Badami.
Yes.
And then Commissioner Tabana?
Yes.
Commissioner Birch?
Yes.
Commissioner Hudis?
Yes.
Commissioner Barnett?
Yes.
Vice Chair Janoff?
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. So it passes unanimously, and I will ask Director Paulson if there are any appeal rights on this action by the commission.
Yes, thank you, Chair Hansen. Anyone who's not satisfied with the decision of the Planning Commission can appeal that decision to the Town Council. Forms are available online on the town's website. The appeal must be filed within 10 days. There is a fee for filing the appeal, and that concludes that statement.
All right, thank you very much. All right, so that concludes all of our public hearings, and so now we will move on to other business. And we do have one item on the agenda for other business, and that is the thing I brought up at our last meeting about the idea that Vice Chair Janoff and I had to start a subcommittee from members of the Planning Commission with the goal of trying to identify some areas where we can find new objective standards that we might be able to put in place for land use. And this really came up in the context of the general plan. But as we learned from staff, there are actually other places where it might be appropriate to have objective standards besides the general plan. But we are getting ready with the general plan advisory committee. Within the next 2 months, we will be going over the first draft of the land use and community design element. And we've been working hard with the General Plan Advisory Committee to try and identify objective standards even outside of land use as well, to increase the effectiveness of the general plan update. So I think it would really help with all the expertise we have on this commission to have a couple of members. We're allowed to have up to 3 that could be on the subcommittee, and then they could meet on a ad hoc basis without violating the Brown Act or anything like that, to look at some of the standards in the general plan to start with, and then maybe move on to some other things. So, but we do need to vote as a commission to decide to establish the subcommittee, and we can do as a follow-up from that determining who's going to be on the subcommittee and who has time for it. I having said that, I wanted to get any comments if you had, or if you think it's a good idea, if I could get a motion to move ahead with the subcommittee. Commissioner Hudis.
I think it's a terrific idea, particularly in light of the hearing that we had earlier today and some of the challenges that we've had. There were a number of items that actually Commissioner Barnett and I looked at when we were doing the North 40 specific plan, where we wished that they were more objective or recommended that they were more objective, but there wasn't really a process for going through that on a systematic basis. So I think it's a terrific idea. I think it'll be very helpful to the town and frankly for applicants and developers as well, to have to have a clear path on some of the things that maybe are more challenging, but we could take a stab at making them more objective. I think it'll be good for everyone.
That's great. And I should add that the expectation of the subcommittee wouldn't be to completely research everything, that would be good to come up with ideas, and then the ones that we think are most viable for staff to take on. And I believe staff has identified that they're taking on they're looking into hiring a consultant to help on this process. But I do feel like those of us in the trenches with our land use decisions will be in the best position to kind of look at and say, here's an area where I think we could really use an objective standard. So just to make that clear, you don't, if you happen to be on the subcommittee, you don't have to do all of the work. It's going to be to really brainstorm. So that being the case, are there any other comments or questions, or is there someone that would be willing to make a motion? I guess I could make them, or should I make the motion? I don't know, but Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, then I will make a motion that to establish a planning commission subcommittee for up to 3 members to work on the goal of identifying some areas for new objective standards in the general plan, and then as time permits to look at other documents as well. And I don't know how long the subcommittee will be in place, but I would assume for at least 6 months. Is there a second? Commissioner Gatos?
I would second it. And I would also have a question of the chair about what is sort of the approximate time frame when the general plan will be concluded so that this work will be pretty much done?
The staff can answer better than I could, but what I've been told by staff is that the General Plan Advisory Committee will be finishing its work somewhere in the first quarter of 2021. And then it will go, there's an environmental review process and while we're going through all the iterations of the draft, there will be research going on the objective standards themselves. So it's not necessarily all going to be in place in the actual general plan at the moment we finish. But that the final approvals for town council staff, correct me if I'm wrong, we're looking at like probably mid 2021 or late 2021. I don't know.
So spring, summer 2021, hopefully, but that still depends on a lot of factors. And I think just for the planning commission's understanding, there's going to be a lot of, it's really going to be trying to find areas where objective standards are appropriate. A lot of those, frankly, aren't going to belong in the general plan because that's the highest level document. They may find themselves in the zoning code more appropriately, but we can have those conversations, see where folks think objective standards should be created, talk about the pros and cons of those, and then figure out what ultimately wants to be recommended and have the full planning commission and council make those decisions, whatever that process is. General plan update, zoning code amendments, following the general plan update. There's a number of possibilities.
Okay, so I think we have a motion and a second. Any other comments or questions? All right, so then I will go ahead with our roll call vote, and I will start with Commissioner Badami.
Yes.
And Commissioner Tabana?
Yes.
Commissioner Birch?
Yes.
Commissioner Hudis?
Yes.
Commissioner Barnett?
Yes.
Vice Chair Janoff?
Yes.
And I vote yes as well, so it passes unanimously. Thank you all very much, and I think this will be great. And then we'll figure out subsequent to this meeting exactly how to get this thing started. All right, so then the next item on the agenda is report from community development. Oh, Vice Chair Janoff.
Sorry, question about the subcommittee. Are you looking for volunteers at this time, or how do you want to proceed with populating the committee?
I'm happy to look for volunteers. I had some ideas about who I thought might be interested that I was planning to talk to, but I'm also, if you have an interest in it, I would be glad to hear it. So maybe shoot me an email or text or whatever. I think we have all of our contact information. And, but anyways, if I don't hear from anybody, I will reach out to some people that I think might be interested as well. So with the hopes of kind of having the subcommittee members identified by our next meeting, because while this work's going on with the general plan, the sooner we can get started, the better. All right. Any other questions? Okay. All right. So then we have the vote done. So now we go to report from community development.
Thank you, Chair Hansen. So there was nothing on last week's council meeting that was directly related to Planning Commission, but I did want to make folks aware. Actually, last night there was a community workshop regarding policing, and that I believe either is or will be posted online. There'll be an upcoming panel on September 29th. There'll be another workshop slash conversation regarding affordable housing. So we will have a panel of folks, including myself and the town attorney, the town manager, in addition to others, to speak about affordable housing within the town. And I believe it has not been scheduled yet, but I believe there will also be a third meeting, which I don't know the topic. I'm not sure if the town attorney does, but I understand there might be a third workshop in October.
Commissioner Hedges.
I just had a question. If we're doing this workshop, but the BMP program, is that scheduled to come before council? And does that come before or after the workshop?
Sorry, which?
The Planning Commission made some recommendations on changes to the below market plan.
Yeah, so that will be after that workshop. So
okay.
The September 29th is the workshop, and October 1st is when those guideline modifications, I believe, are currently proposed to be to move forward to council. Actually, I think October 6th. Sorry, not the 1st.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
All right, great. Okay, and then the next item on the agenda is subcommittee reports. In addition to their service on the Planning Commission, members of the commission serve on several town committees. And I know there was a Conceptual Development Advisory Committee meeting today, so perhaps our vice chair of that committee, Commissioner Barnett, could speak about that.
Thank you. So the Conceptual Development Advisory Committee did meet this afternoon concerning a property at 212 College Avenue, APN 527-31084. This is a request for a subdivision of a lot into 3 lots with the existing residents on lot 1 to remain and residential improvements on lots 2 and 3 to be constructed. And so there was a lively conversation about considerations, and I believe that they were accepted under consideration by the applicant.
Very much. Thank you very much for that report. And then the General Plan Advisory Committee did meet last week, and we had our second review of the mobility element, and we still did not finish. So we are going to be finishing that discussion next week on Thursday, as well as proceeding to, I believe, the second draft of the hazards and safety element. But we had a very, very, very good discussion by the committee, and we talked about possible objective standards and kind of went into a lot of detail about the policies. So I think the end product will be a really good one, but it's been taking a long time to get through all of the material. So, but staff tells me we're still on target to finish the General Plan Advisory Committee meetings where we review all the elements and have it ready to go to Planning Commission by the first quarter. So. And I don't think historic preservation met in the last 2 weeks. Okay, all right. So that being the case, I will ask if there's any commission matters. Is there anything anyone on the commission would like to bring up at this time? All right, seeing none, I will thank you all for your participation and for going through this very long meeting and having really great comments as usual. So we will see you all in a couple weeks. This meeting is adjourned.